Hi guys, welcome to this video which is going to be about Prepared or P3D from Lockheed Martin. Now there's obviously been quite a lot of activity over the last few months or the last while about whether or not to change from FSX to P3D, and during this I will have a quick look at P3D and I will discuss some of my opinions. Now obviously people may differ from it, but obviously the key here is that it's a very personal choice whether to move on or not. And there's a few reasons for that. So in terms of licensing, a quick thing is where P3D came from. Microsoft used to have two products that ran in parallel. There was FSX and there was ESP. And if you like, ESP was the commercial training variant of FSX. So at home you'd have FSX, and if you were running a commercial firm for whatever reason, you would have ESP. And Prepared is the sort of offspring, for want of a better way of putting it, of ESP. So basically when Microsoft decided not to support Flight Simulator FSX, they sold the licensing and the rights to ESP onto Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin are a systems and technical simulation firm who do fixed base simulators and full motion simulators and mission tactical simulators. So it's a slightly different setup. Now the key why it's slightly different is in terms of what Lockheed Martin want to use this product for, and they want this product to be used for serious training. So when you look on the opening page, it's looking at private pilots, commercial organisations, militaries and academia for experiential learning. Now that becomes an issue with let me go here, licenses. The two key licenses are the professional license and the academic license. Now the professional license is $200, the academic license is $60. Now when you look at the professional license, they're expecting private pilots, commercial organisation, militaries and academia, and the academic they're looking at people who are going to use it for hands-on study, etc., for decision making or critical thinking. And here's the difficult bit. Lockheed Martin, in terms of their end user licensing agreement, do not license, for want of a better way of putting it, or afford the idea of personal consumer entertainment. So if you're going to play it on a computer as a game, that's breach of their end user licensing agreement. So if you're studying to be a private pilot, you probably fit into the academic license as a training thing. I don't know, you'd have to read the end user licensing agreements specific to that. Likewise the professional license, training, instruction, learning, simulation for graduates as well. So from my interpretation, if you're just going to play it as a game, then you're in breach of the end user licensing agreement. But if you're going to use it as a training aid, come what may, then you probably fit into one of these two categories as a graduate or undergraduate. Now the video bit that I do about P3D, you will see the only key difference between the two is in the top right of the window. You'll see academic for an academic license and nothing for a professional license, but otherwise as I understand it they're pretty much identical. Now I've bought the academic license, and I've bought it because I do meet the criteria in that I am an undergraduate student, albeit an old one, but this is my first degree and I am currently studying a core science degree. So I do meet the criteria. One of the things is that when you sign up for the academic license, it actually has a little box where you sign up with your details, which asks for your academic institution that you are studying at. So yeah, I mean, whether you get it as a game or not, I don't know. Whether you go for the professional license or the academic license, I don't know. The probability of Lockheed Martin chasing after somebody, you know, for a $200 product because they happen to play it as a game, personally I think that's pretty slim. But obviously I have to make you aware of this to be proper and correct, and particularly you'll see any videos I put on will have academic license in the top right, and likewise the videos that I put on from Prepared will be either tutorial based or reviewing aircraft or simulations or systems or avionics or something to do with, if you like, the simulated environment or the use of the product as a simulator rather than as an entertainment game or product. So I will have some more P3D videos on, but they won't be the kind of thing where it's hey, look at me, I'm flying in really bad weather, how awesome am I? Stands out a bit really. I'm quite confused because a lot of the products that are going or a lot of the add-ons, sorry, that are being developed, they're kind of the things that you would expect to see in a game in many respects. Now the only thing that discriminates them is the fact that the stuff that's coming out for P3D tends to be very high fidelity. It tends to be very accurate. Now a lot of FSX add-ons can be ported over, but it's worth checking before you buy whether it can be or not. But as I say, a lot of the stuff that's coming out and is being supported by Lockheed Martin is a very high fidelity simulation. So the Pilatus PC9, for example, and so on and so forth. The other thing that's interesting is the aircraft. Some of them have come as a direct port from FSX, others are specifically developed for P3D. But I'll have a look at those in the second part of the video. As I say, the key for the first part is just to make you guys aware of the licensing. You know, there's been chat on the forums about it, but you know, that's a very personal choice. But realistically, the professional license and the academic license, there's not that much difference I'm aware of in the products. There is a big difference in the price, but if you're going to start sticking stuff on YouTube, you would need to make sure that you buy the correct license. And as I say, I suppose in many respects fortunate that I've started a science degree as an undergraduate, and therefore I do meet the criteria of the academic license. With regards to that, I shall see you guys in a second, or speak to you guys in a second, once I've booted up Prepared P3D. Hi guys, welcome to the aircraft section. Now, Prepared, or P3D, however you want to look at it, has made a number of significant changes compared to FSX, or ESP I should say, which is the real sort of father of this simulator. Now there's a couple of really big differences which I'm going to go through in a moment, but one of the things I'm going to just quickly go through is the fact that there are, as one would imagine, quite a large number of new aircraft. So let's get to a decent area. So there's quite a number of new aircraft to look at, and there's quite a few of the old ones have gone. So for example, the old Airbus A321 has gone. However, the new aircraft include things like this, which is the T6 Texan 2, which is a lovely aircraft. Now the key thing about this is they haven't just added aircraft. These aircraft are made by known, reputable aircraft add-on designers or developers. So this, for example, has come from Iris, who are a company that do generally modern aircraft, such as the F-22 that's also involved. Now, for most of the aircraft that have been involved, for most of the developers that have been involved, they put together a really nice package of aircraft. So you've got this, which is a turboprop trainer. You've got the Coronado A36, which is a lovely aircraft. Dino Catanio's F-35A. Alabeo have put in their extra 300S, which is a nice aircraft. And Lionheart Creations have put a Mooney Acclaim. Now, there's also a change in avionics. So some of these aircraft have got the Garmin G1000 navigation system, which is a very good system. And it's with regards to this simulation, it's not obviously a complete simulation of what is generally thought to be a very complex sort of avionics set. And I can speak from experience to say yes, it is a complex set. However, the key element here is that all of the people who've provided these aircraft are aircraft add-on designers, and so the quality of what you're getting is quite good. So you can see the rivet lines of the bitmaps. quite clearly. It's nicely detailed, it's got all the right markings, the ejector seat markings, it's got nice moving sections like the canopy, it's got nice MDC, miniature detonation cord. This, by the way, is for ejector seats. Basically what it happens is this canopy is kind of a perspex material, and what the MDC does is it explodes, it shatters the canopy, and then the ejector seat goes through. Over the years there's been all sorts of ones. There's been ones that blow the canopies off, there's been ones that have a big spike above the seat, so in theory it penetrates the canopy before you go through, but that's what that is. But the detailing is quite nice. Now obviously these are, for all intents and purposes, free aircraft. So if you were to go out and buy a £60 $100 PMDG add-on aircraft, you would expect the detailing to be immense. But this does have nice detailing. It's got lovely lighting effects, and almost a sort of reflective effect in the shadow. In fact, there is in the prop spinner. It's got detailing on the props in terms of the manufacturer's labels and the light coming off the props. So if you look at it at different angles, the colours change. The lighting is a separate issue, and I'll discuss that in a moment. But on the whole, the new aircraft are very, very good. Now, in line, I suppose, with the end user licensing agreement, a lot of the aircraft have moved towards specific categories, and those specific categories seem to have removed airliner type categories. And I think the issue here is a couple of things. Firstly, the target audience for Prepared academic version is going to be different to a commercial simulator company who say runs a 737 fixed base simulator. If you want a 737 fixed base simulator program, you would never even contemplate the default 737 that's in FSX or ESP. However, there is mileage in having an aircraft like this in the default version or the academic version, because, for example, the professional version can be used by PPLs. So having a good range of private pilots licensed general aviation aircraft, such as the Coronado A36, the Baron 58, and so on and so forth. These are things that, if you're a private pilot, you would appreciate having in the sim. Now, obviously, you can add things like A2A's Cherokee, for example, but fundamentally, it shows the shift that there is in terms of a difference between FSX and Prepared. The nature of the aircraft that are involved in Prepared are different. There's a high level of general aviation aircraft, of training aircraft. The multi-engine aircraft are predominantly turboprop or piston prop. So you can see they've looked at aircraft that have different handling characteristics, different flight envelopes, and so on and so forth. These aircraft are not designed to fly you from Innsbruck to London, for example. It's just not what they're aiming for in terms of their target, and that's quite apparent. But otherwise, the aircraft are really quite good. There are some legacy aircraft. I mentioned the Baron 58, but you've also got the King Air, you've got the Mooney Bravo, you've got the Piper Cub and the R22, for example. So there are a number of legacy aircraft, but you can see again with those aircraft, they're predominantly there, not necessarily so that you can fly massive airliner type routes. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go any further into that, but I think that's probably linked with their target audience. Now, let's just jump into the aircraft. Something that's been levelled, not as a criticism but as a remark, is that the cockpits seem quite dark in Prepared, and when I've looked at them, I think that's been borne out in my experience. The cockpits aren't as light an environment as, say, FSX or even X-Plane 10 for that matter. Now, a number of people have kind of tried to do a workaround fix in terms of looking at the lighting, in terms of file configuration, and others just basically turn the brightness up on their monitor. My concern with just messing with the brightness on the monitor is that this area here is quite bright, so to make this more visible, potentially you risk over brightening the things like the clouds. But it is a criticism that's been raised. I have occasionally found it a problem that when you're flying in low light conditions, this aircraft, I haven't been able to find the switch that in effect lights up this area. So I found the switch that lights up these little panels down here, the floodlight, and these are the floodlights here, these yellow bits, but I haven't found anything that really enhances the instruments for me. So it's a bit of a bugbear, but I'm sure there is a workaround somewhere. So that's discussing the new aircraft. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get this started, and while I do so I'm going to discuss the rendering engine. So let's close the exit. Now, the common thing is, do I get a performance boost? And that's what a lot of people would potentially ask. And I would say a guarded yes and no. So I've actually set my target as 60 frames per second up here. However, I'm getting on average 30 frames a second, which is perfectly usable. And actually that's pretty much the same as the refresh rate of the videos on YouTube. So that's not too problematic. The reason why I'm getting a lower frames per second is because I'm running Fraps to record this. However, it seems to stabilize at 30, and I haven't chosen that as a target frames per second. You can see I've chosen 60. Why it's stabilizing around 30, I don't really know. Whether or not it's the settings I have set or whatever, I don't know. So is there an opportunity for a frame boost? Yes, of a fashion. Basically the rendering engine here is a different rendering engine. It's DX11, which means that if you have let's just get this started. We've got all of those on, turn that on, turn that on, and the engine cutoff's on. If you have a DX11 capable graphics card, you will see some benefit. If your graphics card is not capable of DX11, I would hazard a guess that you're not going to see much benefit. And the reason for that is several-fold. Should have had my avionics there on then. There it is. Right, there we go. Now I can see what the engine's doing. Naughty boy. So the graphics rendering, DX11 has allowed the simulator to offload some of the rendering processes to the graphics cards, or the DX11 compatible graphics cards, I should say, and that's an important point to stress. However, that's not to say this isn't still a CPU dependent program. It is. It's still heavily CPU dependent, and that I would assume comes from its basic architecture. It's still 32-bit, it's still restricted by 4 gig RAM, it's still got the same underlying driver for flight dynamics, etc. that as far as I understand. It's the key difference here is the rendering of the graphics, and the fact is that yes, you can get a performance increase in terms of frames per second, but actually when you look in the menus there are a vast number of additional choices that weren't there before, particularly with regards to shadows. So there's a more dynamic shadowing system and HDR lighting system. What that means is that you can choose what casts shadows and what receives the shadows. So say for example I can turn around and say terrain gives shadows. I can then turn around and say my aircraft receives those shadows. I can turn around and say my virtual cockpit gives shadows and my aircraft receives shadows. I can turn around and say the terrain gives shadows, but it doesn't affect my aircraft, it only affects the other terrain. And this brings with it a massive amount of choices. However, clouds still damage your frame rate, so if you go overboard on clouds you will still hurt your frame rate. HDR lighting still hurts your frame rate, and this is where the performance thing comes in. In FSX I could have all my sliders pretty much over to the right and I would have no problems. I could still run most of the aircraft at between 40 and 50 frames per second. Some of the aircraft would run, you know, over 60, but generally most aircraft I could get certainly between 40 and 50. With this, I've found that that's not the case, and the reason being is that if I put all my sliders over to the right, then I'm asking in effect more than I would have asked for FSX. because the textures can give more. You know, they've redesigned the textures, so you've got the ability to have texture limits of 4096 by 4096, which is higher than FSX. You've got a different shader model. You've got the ability for terrain resolution to be 12 centimeters, and all these are better than FSX. So the temptation is, well, hey, you know, I've got a better performing program here, let's knock all the sliders up. Well, the issue really there becomes the fact that the temptation is to use the graphics engine the same as you would with FSX, but the graphics are more potent, not because they look more blingy, for want of a better way of putting it, but because you have more choices, and each of those choices brings with it an additional load on the computer. So subsequently, yes, you do get a performance boost if you run the detail at the same level as FSX, but that detail will be lower down on the sliders of P3D. If you want to max out the sliders on P3D, it's even more demanding than FSX, and that's the way to look at it for me. Now, the reason why that is when you read the various bits of blurb, 1013, lovely, when you read the various bits of blurb about P3D and Prepared, it becomes apparent because they've got increased internet multiplayer capabilities, multi-channel, so you can use multiple computers more easily. You're able to get 360-degree visuals. So for the people who like to link together 5, 6, 7 computers, or the people who are designing mission simulators where you might want multiple versions of these running together, there's more flexibility, and that's why you've got this ability to have much more realistic environments. Now, I've had to turn down some of my sliders to get a reasonable frame FPS, so they're not maxed out, and you can see the effects of some of it. Now, up here we've got a cloud, nice puffy white cloud. You've got volumetric clouds, you've got shadows. So here you can see, here's a nice well lit area, and you know, it's even well lit down here, and then here you've got one of the cloud shadows. So there is a more dynamic, here's a nice lit area, here's a cloud shadow. So you've got a more dynamic weather system because the clouds move, the clouds are volumetric, the fog, you can get volumetric fog, and what that basically means is when you fly into it, you don't just get a whiteout, it's graduated from the outside to the inside. So you can be flying in fog, and you know, you're not necessarily in a whiteout situation. Now, what I would say is the experiences I've had, it's not perfect. So there are still circumstances where your screen will go either completely white or completely blue skies as if there's nothing wrong. We're going to take off now and get airborne. They've modelled some of the elements of this aircraft quite nicely. There is a delay between advancing the throttles and the torque coming on for the turboprop, which is pretty much as you would have it in real life. I have got the wind set on, I've got no idea what it is. It appears to be a little bit from the right, which is nice in mountainous terrain. That'll give us a nice downdraft from the right, deep joy. So I haven't read the figures for this aircraft, I'm just going to take off by feel, see how we get on. That feels about right. Get the gear up, reduce the drag. This is a really nice, this Texan 2 is a really nice aircraft to fly. I can't emphasise that enough. So going back to the scenery and the rendering, you can see actually, considering this is on fairly mediocre settings, this is the middle, the rock faces look absolutely glorious. They look much better than in FSX, default FSX. And that's one of the important things, is this is the default scenery. I haven't added FTX Global, I haven't added any texture packs to this, I haven't added anything to this. This is just the default scenery, and it's very nice too. I really do rate it. Obviously most people who buy this, if they're going to use it professionally, would consider updating the scenery, particularly with the mesh, so that it's accurate in terms of terrain, elevation, etc. But for someone who's using it for a private use rather than as a company, certainly they would probably consider adding scenery packs to it. But there's no reason why you would need to rush out and go and get a scenery pack. Now, a couple of things in terms of rendering. You can see the clouds being rendered nicely here in amongst the treetops, and that's very nice. Lighting effects, if you look here, you can see the red glow around this navigation light, and you can also see the shimmer which comes from the strobe light. Let's have a look forwards again because we're in rain. Now, dynamic weather. It only rains when you're underneath a cloud and should be receiving rain. So if I go over this way away from the cloud, let's have a look above us. If I go over here away from the cloud, I should be able to escape the rain fairly soon. The weather system is more dynamic and is better than FSX, and that's without doubt a fact. I've found it to be a much better weather system. Now, it's not necessarily going to compete with a weather system that you might go out and spend money on, but it is a very good setup. And no rain, woo! So that's in terms of the graphics. You've got these dynamic shadows. You can see them here. It's an absolutely lovely effect. You've got your volumetric clouds. You've got the shade from the shadow here. You can see the cloud speed is different to that of the land underneath. You've got the low-lying mist of the clouds in the valleys, and you've got the shading as it moves away. The skies and the clouds look very believable, and the fields below look very believable. So, all things told, I think that the rendering has made a difference to the appearance. Now, the difficulty is that in order to use a lot of the options, you do hurt your frames per second. And this is where I'm saying the offset is. To get the same visual standard as you would have in FSX, you can't have all the sliders maxed out, or I haven't been able to get all the sliders maxed out in this, the same as you would do in, say, FSX. I can pretty much max out most things in FSX, but I can't with this. Now, the same problems, because of the core coding, are still pertinent here. You still apply things like high known fix and all the various tricks that you would do in FSX, but you know that's well known. And Venitubo, for example, his tweak utility on the internet still works on P3D prepared. It still has significant benefits, and it's still worth looking at things like that to improve your frame rate, etc. So that's pretty much covered all the graphics. I suppose the key then is what other things are relevant. So we've discussed the aircraft, discussed the graphics. There's a couple of things that have been added on. From the military perspective, and this may indicate some of the targets, they've added things like weapon dynamics, and military mission systems are able to be set up. And it's the kind of thing where if you look at the menus, you can freeze the aircraft, you can move the aircraft around from any external point of view. Now, it's similar to the slew command, but for example, what you can do is you can freeze the position of the aircraft, and the aircraft isn't paused, it's just held in its lateral position. So if you were training on ILS approaches, for example, you can freeze the position of the aircraft. It still acts as if it's flying, say, vertically, so you can freeze the lateral position, but that's the kind of thing they've added in. Now, for a general user, that's not necessarily going to be something as a feature used massively, but it is a feature nonetheless that you might wish to use. So that's one element. Now, there is a setup which is SimDirector, which is the mission controller, and I've had a look at it, and to be honest, it confuses the heck out of me. I really don't know how I would use that as part of the program. It's obviously there to enable the more professional user to set up simulations that trainee pilots or trainee aircrew can then go into. Now, they've added the ability for things like submersibles and underwater vehicles, and that kind of thing becomes important because in a multi-environment simulator such as this, you may be looking at coordinating missions with ships, boats, aircraft, ground vehicles, and so on and so forth. So the availability is there. I mean, that cloud looks fantastic just the way it goes past. The availability is there as a mission designer to use multiple vehicles. Again, it's not something that a general user is going to use, but it demonstrates what Lockheed Martin are potentially trying to achieve with this simulator. They're not trying to achieve an entertainment product, and that's consistent with the end user licensing agreement. You can see from that their target audience is different from the home user. Now that brings me on to the final question. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to climb up for a spin and see how I get on. This aircraft is an absolute pig to spin, by the way. Basically, if you're not slick with the rudder, the first thing is normally you would release the control column, have it central, and then potentially gradually move it forwards to break free from the spin. Now in this aircraft you have to move the stick right, fully forwards. There's no let's move it a little bit forwards. It's fully forwards or nothing, or it won't come out of the spin. The second thing is that it spins in a very nose down attitude, which first of all can be quite disorientating. The second thing is once you stop spinning, you then have a tendency to be nose down, falling very quickly towards the ground, and your speed builds up massively quickly, because basically at that point you're a rock that just happens to have the ability to steer. So I'm going to take the power off now and we'll see how we get on. So flaps are up, gears up, power's coming off. Nice nose high attitude for the speed to come off, and what we're going to do is make sure we're in balance, and we'll try a spin round to the right. So stick fully back into the lap, full rudder to the right, 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns, and recovering. Now you can see actually we've gone upside down there. We've got to watch our speed, because that tends to increase very rapidly. And we had a 6,000 feet per minute rate of descent there, so that's consistent with what I've seen previously. Now we're going to descend fairly quickly now and head back towards Innsbruck. So the question that's left really is, if I'm an FSX user, should I move on to Prepared P3D? And the question is answered by another question: why do you want to move to P3D? Now, the biggest reason that somebody may wish to move is not for the graphics. The graphics aren't earth-shatteringly different. The ability to set up your own flights isn't earth-shatteringly different. The key difference that comes out of all of this I haven't yet mentioned is stability. Prepared P3D is a much more stable program, or certainly it has been for me, than FSX. FSX has been a let me just have a quick look at the map before I fly into the wrong area. World map. Okay, so I need to be heading east. FSX for me has been a fairly unstable program on and off over the years, and it depends what add-ons I've had, and there have been a number of times where I've had to reinstall it, strip out add-ons, and start all over again, which is insanely frustrating. It's also insanely frustrating when you have no idea why the thing is crashing, and it either dumps you back to the desktop or whatever it may be. So FSX can be insanely frustrating, and what I would say is twofold. First of all, you can see the impact of the darkness on the cockpit, on the instruments now. The second thing is, it's a lot of money. You know, the professional version is $200. The academic version is still $60, and even $60 is a lot of money for a sim. There's Innsbruck. Let's get that speed down. We're just going past the barber pole. Stressed that the engineers would not be happy at that. So, why would you be buying this? If you want it to have more bling graphics wise, I personally don't think there's much point, because by the time you start to add on things like this is really horrible weather to be this low. Innsbruck's 2,600 feet when you're on 1013, so we are going down. I can just about see the ground. And that kind of thing is actually one of the better reasons why you would want to buy this, is the weather engine does have a very immersive effect. So as I say, it depends why you'd want to buy it. If you want to buy it because it offers more stability, then great. If you want to buy it because the default options are better than FSX, that's great as well. If you want to buy it as a training aid, then fundamentally that's why it's there. However, why might you not want to buy it? If you have an extensive catalogue, back catalogue of FSX add-ons, they are not guaranteed to work with this in any way, shape or form. This is the most unorthodox approach you'll probably ever see. Let's try and get the speed down and we can get the gear down. What we'll do actually is we'll go and do a circuit. We'll join downwind. I think that may have a contributory factor with a tailwind, because we started on the reciprocal of this route. Let's recycle the gear and see if it's going to come down, and we'll do a low-level circuit. Yeah, there we go, 3 greens. Bit of power coming on now. You can see the delay between the power going on and the turboprop spooling up. So if you have a number of FSX add-ons, there's no guarantee that they're going to work with this, and Lockheed Martin potentially don't provide any support, which is a key element here. Is the software provider for the add-on isn't necessarily going to provide any support, and Lockheed Martin aren't necessarily going to provide any support. And there are tools out there to migrate scenery and add-ons to P3D, but there's no guarantee that they would actually work. Yeah, it does look nice. So yeah, if you want the visual bling, it's not that remarkable, if I'm honest. It's good, but it's not remarkable. It's not something I would deliberately go out and spend money on just for the visual bling. It is better than FSX, but if you would consider putting add-ons on that you would add on for FSX anyway, then you're completely negating that fact. If the dynamic shadows, for example, are something that is good and that you very much enjoy, then that's fine. Again, we're going to do our most unorthodox approach. We're going to do a dive bomb and then level out for the speed to bleed off. If you're particular about trying to use your DX11 rendering facilities, then great. But is there a need to move across from FSX? In my opinion, not necessarily. This is going to be a long landing as well at this speed. So we'll just allow the speed to bleed off a little bit early. Try and maintain the centre line. And I'm going to be doing a lot of braking at the end of this. Brake! If I was buying a new sim, I'm not sure. I would potentially hold off, because Dovetail Games have bought the license for FSX, and at the moment they haven't, other than the distribution platform having changed to Steam, and them taking on the license from Microsoft and saying that as a result they are basically going to look at where they take FSX. At the moment it's still a bit of an unknown. So my gut instinct is, if you currently use FSX, I would like to hold, if I were you, I would potentially hold off and have a look at what they're doing in terms of whether they're going to try and move the program across to 64-bit. Because if they move this across to 64-bit, I mean the difference would be enormous. The simple fact it would be able to use more memory would instantly increase the performance. Even if they did nothing else to it, the ability to use more memory would transform the simulation, in my opinion. And if it was made less CPU dependent, again, that would potentially transform the simulation. However, that's potentially many months down the line. In the meantime, we are stuck with the FSX we've got. As I say, my personal opinion is, if you want to use your existing add-ons, and your existing add-ons add a lot of bling, then you might as well stick with that, because once you start adding those add-ons onto P3D, you're not necessarily going to see huge advantages. What you will see potentially is more rendering options, more options to stick in the graphics, and therefore you can make it slightly better in terms of things like shading, shadows, light options, rendering, terrain detail. But a lot of these affect the default scenery just as well, and really that's what it comes down to. There's a little bit more visual bling, you can have a little bit more performance. It's not earth-shattering by any stretch of the imagination. And that's one of the key things, is don't expect to buy P3D and be blown away by it. It does afford more options and it does afford better lighting, but realistically speaking it's not necessarily going to blow your socks off compared to FSX, in my opinion. I think there might be people who would disagree with that, but again, that all depends on your system. It depends on what you're running, it depends on what your settings are, it depends on how you tweak it. And this is one of the difficulties, is that this has some of the inherent flaws that FSX still has. Still 32-bit, still needs a lot of tweaking, and it's still very much a personal thing in terms of how to tweak and how to set it all up. So yeah, I mean, that's it, guys. The long and the short of it is, it's a bit of an unknown quantity in terms of where it's going. You can tell that a lot of thought has gone into it in terms of where Lockheed Martin expect it to be, but that's not necessarily the same as where you would want to take FSX, and that's one of the critical things. Is, from my perspective, I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy it just for the sake of saying it's an upgrade from FSX, because it's not necessarily an upgrade from FSX. Not quite sure why the engine cutoff hasn't worked. There we go. Yeah, please feel free to stick some comments in the comments section. Let me know what you think. If you already use P3D, feel free to stick some comments on with your opinions. And if you're looking at the changeover, then again, it's a good forum as a place to ask some questions. I won't necessarily have the answers, but I'm sure there'll be people who chip in who do have some good answers. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to click like, subscribe, or even better if you can share it, just to get the word out about what I'm doing. And hopefully I'll speak to you guys soon. Take care.